a few centimeters. If you think over millions of years, you're moving kilometers. About 250 million years ago, all the plates were together in Pangea, and they're moving apart, and they will come back together again.
Why do they move back together?
Because the Pacific Ocean right now has subduction all around it, and the plate is actually being consumed and recycled, where the Atlantic Ocean is spreading without much subduction. So the Atlantic Ocean is going to grow, the Pacific Ocean is going to close, and then we'll start getting closer to Asia and closing up the Pacific Ocean.
So what is plate tectonics? Plate tectonics is simply a theory that states that the Earth's crust and the upper mantle is broken into sections called plates, and what these plates do is they move around on top of the surface like rafts. They just kind of float around, and we at this point right now are actually moving just a little bit at a time. We're just sliding across, moving across the Earth's surface on these plates that we live on. Now the plates are divided into two different types of plates. First you got the ocean plates, which are just the plates that are below the ocean areas of the Earth. Then you got the continental plates, which are what we're standing on right here, right now, which all they are the plates that are below the continents. So obviously if you have all these plates moving around, sooner or later they're going to bump into each other. These are called plate boundaries, the parts where the plates are converging on each other or coming together somehow. There are three types of plate boundaries. The first type is a divergent boundary. All a divergent boundary is the boundary between two plates that are moving apart, and we call that rifting. The result of this rifting, of moving apart, is seafloor spreading. And when you have seafloor spreading, ultimately all that's happening is you have molten rock that is rising up from the core, and the deep down in the mantle is rising up to fill the gap, and which in turn creates new crust. Now, the second type of boundary we're going to talk about is a convergent boundary. And a convergent boundary is exactly what it says. It's two boundaries that are converging or colliding on each other. They're just coming together. Now within the convergent boundaries, there's going to be three different types of these convergent boundaries that we're going to discuss. The first type of convergent boundary we're going to talk about happens when an ocean plate collides with a continental plate. Now when this happens, the oceanic plate is pressed up under or subducted underneath the continental plate. And we call this a subduction zone when this happens. Now as a result of these, you get volcanoes. This is where volcanoes come from and how they are made. They are just a result of subduction zones happening. Now here is an illustration of the oceanic and continental crust converging on each other. Notice the oceanic crust moving from your left to your right is pressed up underneath the continental crust, and then you get the result, you get volcanoes there. Our second type of convergent boundary is when you have an ocean plate colliding with another ocean plate. Now when this happens, the less dense plate just slides up under the more dense plate. This also causes a subduction zone, but in this case, the subduction zone is called a trench. And here's an illustration of the oceanic convergence. Just notice that the less dense plate, once again coming from your left to your right, is pressed up underneath. But notice that on this one you get the trench, and you don't get volcanoes forming like you did with the oceanic and continental crust converging. Our third type of convergent zone is when you have a continental plate colliding with another continental plate. Now when this happens, you have a collision zone, and the different plates and the different crusts collide and press themselves upwards, and this is where you get folded and thrust faulted mountains form. So this is where all your mountains come from, is from these type of collisions. And once again, here is a picture showing the continental convergence. Notice that the two plates are colliding there in the middle of the picture, and you have your mountain ranges form. Now our last type of boundary is the one that we're probably most familiar with, because this is the one that causes earthquakes. If you've ever lived out on the west coast out in California, you are very familiar with this. These type of boundaries are called transform fault boundaries. These happen between two plates that are sliding past each other. These create faults, and this is where you have earthquakes happen at. And obviously the most famous one of this type of fault, of this type of boundary, is the San Andreas Fault out in California. The following video clip shows the destruction and the power that this type of fault can create.
March 27, 1964. Chaos reigns on Alaska's central coast as the most powerful earthquake in the history of America shakes for 4 long minutes. The town of Seward is on fire. In Valdez, the violent shaking triggers landslides in the bay, creating giant tsunamis. A 200-foot tall wave slams into the freighter SS China.
So in conclusion, don't forget there are 3 types of boundaries that we talked about today. Converging boundaries, where 2 plates converge and bump into each other, run into each other. Divergent boundaries, where 2 plates are moving away from each other. And your sliding boundaries, which the 2 plates are basically just sliding past each other. I hope you enjoyed this presentation on plate tectonics.